There we go. All right, guys. Here we go. Here we go. Okay, shameless plug. Not really. So I'm going to be at this year's Mr. Olympia Expo. I will be there along with Jeff Alberts and the Barbell One team. So I wanted to put this out there so in case you're going on the fence about going or not, maybe that entices some of y'all, and at the very least entices some of you guys to come take a visit and just it's a long day at that booth, so definitely appreciate it if some of you guys stop by and just even if it's just to say hi and just talk about all the things that us meatheads talk about. So yeah, looking forward to that. And again, we'll be there basically every single day, the whole day. You can find me at the Barbell One booth at the Mr. Olympia Expo. Really looking forward to that, guys. And yeah, that is it. Onward. All right, guys, welcome back to another one of our Instagram Q&As. I am Alberto Shakur, and this is
Brian Miner.
And actually,
there.
but yeah, so we post these up on Instagram, and every so often, we'll just ask you guys, ask us some questions. This one's kind of long overdue.
You went out of the country.
Went out of the country for a week, so here we are making it up. We promise we will do a good job.
All right, so we're just going to kind of scroll through, just pick them as we go type of deal. First one, this one got asked twice, so we'll address it. Adam Neth, is mind-muscle connection really that important for building muscle? For example, when doing bench press, should you focus on the contraction and squeeze or just progressively overloading with proper form? I mean, I think this is something that's often overthought.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you're performing the exercise with good technique, the targeted muscles are going to be working. I mean, I think that's really what it boils down to. I don't think, turning your pinky just right on a curl is really going to make the difference between, bringing your arms up or not. So I think it's in terms of like isometrically contracting, I think if anything, it just helps you cue those targeted muscles for the next repetition more so than actually providing an hypertrophy benefits, so to speak. So
no, I agree with you. Like good one thing I like to compare to is like sprinting. Like you see a sprinter run down the track,
mm-hmm.
and everything is flexing and moving. So muscles move joints.
Yeah.
If you're doing the movement correctly, those muscles will be stimulated. And I think sometimes what ends up happening is that when you use heavier loads, you don't necessarily feel it like localized in the muscle.
Yeah.
And I think that's where people kind of lose it. It feels like something's crushing you more than anything.
And I would go as far as to say I think some people that are almost too intentional with their repetitions, they sacrifice load.
Yes.
And they sacrifice mechanical tension, and you don't accumulate as much volume. And so there's certainly something that can be said about going overboard in that regard as well.
So I would say, just learn how to do the movement correctly.
Exactly.
You might feel some more like localized pain there if it's a higher rep movement than you would on a squat, for example. Do you feel your legs on the squat?
Not really.
Not really.
The higher reps.
But they're definitely working. So.
Cue commandments of the low bar squat. I mean, I don't think there are. This one caught my eye because of just the term commandments. I don't think there's one way, like one cue that everybody should use on a low bar squat. This is something I feel pretty strongly about because I feel like lately I have a lot of athletes that will try to mimic somebody else's technique.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes it doesn't turn out favorably for them. And for example, a lot of people will really emphasize with the low bar squat, hips back, and a lot of times that limits the ability for your quads to do their job out of the bottom. And so at the bottom of your squat, your hamstrings really aren't doing a whole lot. And so while I think it can be comfortable for people to learn that cue of hips back, what I tend to see sometimes happens to people is they forget to kind of bring their torso along with it on the way up.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, bar is going to stay over your center of gravity, but you have to make sure you have that intent to keep your torso coming with it. And so, I mean, that can be a useful cue. I've had athletes that have used that cue and it doesn't work out well for them, and they experience, some lower back pain, and they'll switch to like a cue where just allowing their knees to drift a little bit more far forward. And so long as they don't have knee pain, it does allow them to stay a little bit more upright, and they can actually use their quads. And so it's just experimenting and finding, I think, what works for you. And I mean, we squat differently,
Yeah.
the two of us, and I think it's finding what's safe for one, and then what's going to allow you to progress long term.
Yeah, and again, sometimes a certain cue might be an epiphany to some person,
Mhm.
but that changed everything for me,
Yeah.
and to someone else, it just sounds like confusing
Yeah.
gibberish.
Another, like a good example of that is the cue of like putting your hips in extension before you drop them back. Like you'll see a lot of people
Yeah.
drive their hips forward before they break their hips to come back, and when I do that, it just screws me up. And so I feel like I can, as long as I'm controlling that descent, my glutes are activated. Like I don't need that reminder, and when I do it, it actually throws me off more than it benefits me. So
So yeah, I think cues, like we have to see someone squat, and then based on what we're
Yeah.
seeing, give them throw things
Yeah.
almost, and then hopefully something sticks. But yeah, there's no set command.
No.
I'd say.
Let's see. When training a weak body part, do you think simply adding in more frequency would be the most advantageous route?
Well, frequency, volume,
Yeah.
they're
Kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah, they do. So at a certain point, the easiest way to add volume without, I guess, while still keeping each session of good quality, is to just add more frequency. If you have, let's just say, 50 sets a week for a weak body part, I think you get better quality in your work if you scatter that among 4 sessions as opposed to 2, or some people do that in 1 still
Yeah.
to this day. But yeah, here's the catch. I do think that at a certain point, you realize that there's only so many resources out there in regards to mostly recovery
Just
and
adaptation.
so you do have to. It's important that early on you realize like what are your strong points, and then what are the things that might need a bit more attention and volume, and just distribute that accordingly.
Yeah. And for me personally, one thing I kind of caught myself doing, with powerlifting and bodybuilding both being a focus, like my legs from a bodybuilding standpoint are
Really good.
easily my strongest point, but my squat's not. I mean, it's not terrible, but it's not like an elite level squat either. So I noticed though when I started to increase my squat frequency, just the time it took me to warm up, at the end of the day, I was starting to sort just from a time standpoint and just fitting everything in, it was actually more beneficial for me as a whole, like encompassing training plan to squat twice a week rather than 3, just so I could fit other stuff in.
Yeah.
Because I think when you start moving heavier weights, just the time it takes to warm up, and I think that volume also sort of gets, it can get overlooked a little bit in terms of, once you start handling weights in your warm-ups that are above, that 60-ish% range,
Yes.
that starts to count. So, but I think there's for some things, squats for me, like I like the frequency once it's sort of time to peak for a competition. But when I'm just trying to accumulate volume, I can actually get quite a bit across 2 days and not sacrifice everything else. And so those bro splits, you can actually rack up still quite a bit of volume in those. So frequency is one way. I think adding additional sets or additional exercises is another way. And I think use of things like mile reps and blood flow restriction can be a very low stress way to tax some extra volume.
Very practical, very practical. But that's the main thing is if you do recognize that this is a weak body part, I think a lot of people know this, that you will have to give that area more attention, but hardly ever do they execute that.
Yeah.
Everyone wants to work on this stuff.
Yeah.
Grows pretty well, and then the other stuff, well, it's not a whole lot of fun, so
Yeah.
they keep it about the same.
Yeah, so you have to scale it a bit. how do you estimate macros when eating out to ensure you are as close to your prescribed macros for the day without going over too much? This one I feel it gets asked a lot, and I think it's about time to address it.
Yeah. About time.
But it's
About time, Brian.
about time.
Eating all the pizza and not telling you how he does it.
So there's two options. One, you just don't care. Two,
I've never done that.
yeah. And honestly, I think in this day and age, or this era of flexible dieting, it's people can become too obsessive. Like if you want to go out and have something to eat, just go do
There's
it. Like,
nothing wrong with
yeah,
that.
there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. I mean, if you're in the middle of prep,
There's something wrong with that.
yeah, well, we know precision is a tool for us, and so if you're in the middle of prep, you don't. I mean, it's not advisable, but if you're trying to go out and just make a sensible choice, I think people they forgot what common sense can do for them. I mean, if you go out and you think, okay, like if I go out with my grandma and I tell her to pick something healthy,
Yeah.
or if I said what here on the menu is healthy, she's gonna pick something that just intuitively, like she'll know is a lower calorie item. Like you don't need to go out and just like the term cheat meal. I hate that because it insinuates that this is all free.
Yeah.
None of this is gonna count. But you can go out, make intelligent decisions. Like don't be stupid, and it's pretty easy. If you are trying to stick to macros, I think we've talked about this before, how cooks don't care. They're not measuring anything back there, so you can just add like a buffer. If you're really that type A and you want that accountability, I guess, I mean, add 10%, 15% each, whatever you see online, and you'll know you're fine. So long story short, I think if it's few and far between, I mean, it's not something to really concern yourself with. I mean, if you're in the middle of prep eating Chipotle and things like that every single day, there's going to be variabilities that you're not going to be able to account for. So that's not advisable, but have a life outside of a food scale.
And I think practicing doing that frequently, you get better at it eventually over time. So don't avoid those situations. You definitely add a buffer, and the buffers that I added, I'm going with that decision, going through that door, depending on where I'm at in my prep, for example. If I'm not prepping, probably use like 10-15%. If I am prepping, I might go as high as like a third. Like if it says this is 900 calories, I'll make it 1200 or something like that.
Yeah, and that's an easy way. And just picking simple menu items.
Yeah, especially if you have no interest in eating what's there. It's just one of those things that you're eating with grandma. Right. You have to eat with grandma. So I guess that's the one option. B, like add a buffer. The other one is common sense, right?
Common sense. And then I think, you mentioned you get better at estimating the more you do it. And the other side of this is, I think mentally you get better at accepting when you go out that it's not right, and that you're like life's gonna go on the next day.
Yes.
You get people that are, I don't know what was in that meal. I don't know the macros in that meal. Like the day is shot, and that's obviously a flawed, way of reasoning. But there's just gaining that experience, like going out to eat and realizing, oh, hey, this didn't derail me, and I didn't know the macros on this meal. That I think there can certainly be something said for that.
And one thing before we move on, how about the just saying YOLO, and just saying, and that doesn't necessarily mean like I'm gonna eat. Like if I would have ordered exactly what I wanted because it's a YOLO day, I'm gonna eat myself sick almost as like a form of punishment, or because at this point you just derailed the whole plan. No, I think every once in a while it's okay and it's perfectly fine to just have certain days where you're like, you know what, I'm just gonna get exactly what I want. And then over the span of like 15-20 days of being consistent, it's really not going to matter that you ate another 1,000 calories that day.
I guess this question has more to do with mental health.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So
it's not about how you count it; it's how you deal with it.
Yeah. Exactly. It's how you deal with it after that meal, and obviously I deal with it acutely, but
I YOLO quite frequently.
I YOLO.